Welcome back. In the past hour, NATO's foreign ministers have convened for a major meeting in Brussels, where the alliance is due to make a commitment to ramp up military spending. By just how much, however, is still up for negotiation, and it will dominate talks today. NATO Chief Mark Rutte is optimistic that ministers will sign off on spending 3.5% of GDP on core military needs and 1.5% on related expenses such as infrastructure and cybersecurity by 2032.
So what we will do today is to decide what do we need to make it for us to be able to, whenever we would be attacked, to defend ourselves. And by being able to defend ourselves, not being attacked. So, as you know, to prepare for war, spend more. And when you are really prepared for war, you will not be attacked. That will be a considerable extra investment. And this is why I predict that in The Hague we will decide on a much higher spending target for all the nations in NATO.
Mark Rutte there. Well, let's cross over to speak to Jonathan Beale, our defence correspondent, joining us from Brussels. And Jonathan, arguably spending dominating today's agenda. But when you've got some countries like Poland committing to 5% next year, Italy only just hitting 2%, there's a lot to discuss.
Yeah, and I think, clearly the pressure is on from the US because Pete Hegseth, who did not attend yesterday's coalition providing weapons to Ukraine, the meeting that was taking place here at NATO that was chaired by both Britain and Germany. He didn't turn up for that, but he has turned up for this meeting, which is the defence ministers' meeting, the last big meeting before a NATO summit in The Hague later this month, with a clear message. And that message from the US Defence Secretary is that you cannot just rely on America for your defences. You are going to have to spend 5% of GDP on defence. Now, that message is essentially to Europe. It's not to America, which spends 3.4% of its GDP on defence. But that is the deal that America wants at this summit, and that is the deal that Mark Rutte has been working on behind the scenes and is discussing with NATO defence ministers. And essentially what they're meant to be discussing, NATO defence ministers, is capability. In other words, the hardware, military hardware that they need to invest in. And that's meant to drive the spending costs. But really, the person who set the spending target is Donald Trump. And the compromise that Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, has come up with is this idea of spending 3.5% of GDP on military and then 1.5 on defence-related expenditure. Now, that could mean building roads, building bridges, building ports, etc. So it's a pretty vague description. There is still a wrangling going on about when. So there is talk of a date of 2032, some countries saying it must be later, 2035, some countries in the Baltic states suggesting it should be within 5 years. So there are negotiations still ongoing, and some countries are still not happy about that level of defence expenditure. One thing I would say is, remember, they set a target of 2% more than a decade ago. And as you mentioned, some countries have still not met that 2% target. So while it's maybe important to have a target, the fact is that they can't be forced to spend that level on defence spending. It is a target. It's not something that they can be punished for if they don't meet it.
Yeah.